Senhoras, senhores, mais uma vez, bom dia. Quando um rio corta, corta-se de vez.
It cuts immediately the river discourse that it will do with the water. Once it's been cut, water is broken into pieces, into small drops of water in paralyzed water. In that sort of situation, water is the equivalent to our words in a dictionary situation, isolated, completely stuck in its own drop, in its own well. Because it is completely stopped, it is definitely no longer alive. Once it has been stopped, it changes. And it changes because it doesn't communicate with anybody else, because the syntax of this river has been caught with the drip of water in which it would flow. The course of a river, its viscous river water, gradually actually comes back again. A river needs a lot of drops of water in order to remake its old course that made it originally. In a big drought situation, when we have another kind of language of water, a river actually needs a lot of water in its drops so that all the different wells can be filled up. Once it's been reacted from one well to another well in short sentences, therefore sentence to sentence up to the river discourse final sentence, once it is unified, when you have the voice to the drought and fighting it. With these verses from the Reels Without Discourses from the Pernambuco poet João Cabral de Melo, published in the book Education by Pedra, please be welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the ceremony that will open the 3rd International Conference about Adaptation and Climate Changes, Adaptation Futures 2014. The development of measurements and policies to adaptation towards the impact of climate changes has been a great challenge, especially in the developing world countries. While actions connected to mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and its effects in the Earth's surface are global, the solutions in order to adapt to the climate changes have to take into account the local and regional reality. Being inspired in the first 2 editions undertaken in Queensland in Australia and in Arizona in the United States, this conference, amongst its main goals, aims at discussing the climate change's impacts and adaptation strategies all over the world, with focus in Brazil and in our northeastern region, and aims at promoting the creation of an international research network in a collaborative and creative fashion that will allow researchers and policymakers of the northeastern Brazil and the world an opportunity to share its secular experience of coping with droughts and also of finding out more about other experiments elsewhere in the world that face the same undertaking. This event is an undertaking of the CCST of the National Space Research Institute and the United Nations Environment Programme for PROVIA, Global Programme on Research about Climate Change, Vulnerability, Impact and Adaptation. On behalf of the institutions of this event, I would like to register the acknowledgements to all of the sponsors that have made it possible the undertaking of this conference. We would like to acknowledge PROVIA, Research Program on Vulnerability, Impacts and Adaptation, the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, Ministry of Education, Ministry of National Integration, Department of Strategic Affairs, the National Water Agencies, Vale do São Francisco and Parnaíba Development Company, Codevasp, Science Center of the National Institute of Space Program, National Council of Scientific Development and Technological, CAPES, Brazil, Banco do Nordeste, Climate Fund, State Government of Ceará, Inter-American Institute for Cooperation for Agriculture, CGEE, Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Collaborative Adaptation Research, Acclimatize, CSRRO, United Nations Environment Program, World Bank, United Nations Convention to Combat Certification Program. Also, on behalf of the organizers of this conference, I'd like to register my acknowledgements for the support of the CGBDI, Aquaviva, and Fortaleza Convention and Visitors Bureau. Adaptation Futures 2014 takes into its organization the signature of icon events. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to receive our guests to our head table, I'd like to invite the co-chairs of this conference. Dr. José Arango, head of the Science Center of the Earth, National Institute of Space Research, and Dr. Saliman Hook, Director of IIT in Bangladesh. Please, gentlemen. Representing the government of Ceará, I'd like to invite the President of FONSEMI, Mr. Eduardo Martins. Representing the Ministry of Environment, I'd like to invite Mrs. Malana Edler. The Superintendent of the Technical Office of Economic Studies for the Northeast, José Rubens Dutra Mota, here representing the Northeastern Bank of Brazil. Also representing the Center for Strategic Management Studies, I'd like to invite Dr. Antônio Magalhães. I'd like to invite the President of the Regional Council of Engineering and Agronomy, Engineer Victor Frota Pinto. Now I'd like to invite all you ladies and gentlemen to stand for the Brazilian National Anthem, please.
Das margens plácidas de povo heróico, bravo, retumbante. E o sol da liberdade, raios fúlgidos, brilhou no céu da pátria nesse instante. superior. Nessa igualdade conseguimos conquistar com braço forte. Em eu sei, a liberdade desafia o nosso peito a própria morte. A pátria amada, idolatrada, salve, salve. Brasil, um sonho intenso, raio vívido de amor e de esperança, terra desce. Sim, teu formoso céu risonho e límpido, a imagem do cruzeiro resplandece. Gigante pela própria natureza, a estrela é sorte, pátria do colosso, e o teu futuro espelha essa grandeza, terra coral. Entre outras vidas de Brasil, a pátria amada, dos filhos deste sol mais gentil, pátria amada Brasil. Deitado eternamente em berço esplêndido, ao som do mar e a luz do céu profundo, fulguras o Brasil, florão da América, iluminado ao sol do novo mundo. Do que a terra mais ardida, meus risonhos lindos campos têm mais flores, nossos bosques têm mais vida, nossa vida no teu seio mais amor. A pátria amada, idolatrada, salve, salve. Brasil de amor eterno seja símbolo, o lábaro que ostentas estrelado. E diga o verde louro desta flor, mas no futuro e glória no passado. Consegues a justiça cada forte, verás que o vinho teu não foge a luta. Nem quem te adora a própria morte, terra moral. Entre outras vidas do Brasil, a pátria amada, os filhos deste sol és mais gentil, pátria amada Brasil.
Por gentileza, queiram sentar-se.
Now, to carry on with the opening ceremony of this conference and leave a welcome message to all the participants and delegates, I would like to invite one of the co-chairs of this event, Dr. José Marengo, head of the Science Center of the National Institute of Space Research in Brazil, INPE. Good morning, says he in English, Portuguese and Spanish. As one of the organizers of the third climate conference about climate change and adaptations, I would like to welcome each one of you that come from all over the world to this conference. Officially, we have 300 people registered, but I believe we have more than 300 here. It's important to have this representation with 50 different countries represented here. So this is not the best moment to thank all the sponsors that are behind us here in our banners, but actually like to explain that this initiative of PROVIA and INPE, we have decided to take the challenge of holding this third conference. The first was in Australia, second was in the United States, actually to bring this important issue about climate and adaptation. Not only climate change but vulnerability. But after the release of the IPCC report, especially the second one that has to do with impact, vulnerability and adaptation, we observe that adaptation is something that perhaps is the best way or the only way to face climate changes. And the central theme is adaptation, and you will hear here during the panels and the lectures and in the posters everything that's being undertaken with respect to climate and extreme adaptation in different parts of the world. So I'd like to invite you all to interact amongst yourselves, to extend your horizons and your contacts, and also to take part in the poster sessions, in the oral presentations, the oral panels. Anything that we can do as organizers for this conference, obviously in the scientific part. If you have problems with your flights, don't talk to me, talk to the travel agencies. But for the scientific part, anything that you want to, please do feel free to contact me or Celine or another co-chair. And again, welcome you all. I believe that you have brought a bit of rain to alleviate the issue regarding the drought. The rain starts in May. We are in May, but nobody guarantees that once it starts raining in May, it's going to rain a lot. But nobody can guarantee that. But it's an interesting case. The northeastern region in Brazil has been facing 3 years of drought. It's a natural lab. You don't have to wait till 2050 to find out the impacts of the extremes. We have already an extreme and many different impacts. So again, I'd like to thank you all to be here, and I believe and hope you all have a good conference, that you make the most, not only the scientific part, but all the natural beauties of the city of Fortaleza can offer to you. Thank you very much, says he in English. It's an honor to have the presence here, Excellency State Member of the Parliament, Mrs. Eliane Novas. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite now Dr. Salim Hook, Director of IAID in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and co-chair of this conference.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I'm Salim Haq. I'm from Bangladesh, where I'm the head of an International Center for Climate Change and Development. I'm also a senior fellow at the International Institute for Environment and Development based in London in the United Kingdom. But most importantly, I am here as the co-chair of the Scientific Steering Committee of PROVIA, which is the global program on vulnerability, impacts, and adaptation, which is a co-organizer with the Brazilian co-hosts here of this conference. I'll say a few words about PROVIA and about the conference, and hope that we can all have a fruitful time here. So the PROVIA program is a joint UN program between the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, based in Nairobi, and the World Meteorological Organization based in Geneva. And it is to promote the interface between science and policy and science and practice, particularly on adaptation, but also on vulnerability and impacts research. So bringing the research and policy making and practitioner communities together. And these conferences are one way. We've also got a number of publications. Let me just show you one. This is a publication done by one of our scientific steering committee members, Cynthia Rosenzweig at the University of Columbia, on research priorities, and another one done by another member of our scientific steering committee, Professor Richard Klein from the Stockholm Environment Institute, on guidance on the various tools and methods. And we'll have some copies in our booth here if you're interested to pick them up. They're also available on our website. In terms of the conferences, you've already heard that this is the third conference. The first one was held in 2010 in Australia at Griffiths University, organized by Jean Palutikoff, who is here with us and is the co-chair with me of the Scientific Steering Committee of PROVIA. The second one in 2012 was led by Professor Diana Lieberman, who is also here with us. And so the community of researchers and practitioners and policymakers have been meeting regularly and sharing information over the last two conferences, and we're very, very pleased to be here in Brazil, in Fortaleza, for the third conference, and I hope that we will be able to share the work that we are doing. I look forward to seeing the presentations and the posters that are here. and that we will have a fruitful few days together. Let me just end by saying a little bit about how we have collectively moved up the learning curve on what it means to do adaptation to climate change using information based on impacts and vulnerability assessments. I think we've gone through various stages. The initial stage was one of simply correcting maladaptation, where we are doing things that are making ourselves even more vulnerable into the future. I think we've done quite a lot of identifying maladaptations and trying to arrest them. We've then moved on, and this is now, I think, where most of us are, into dealing with adaptation in practice, in what might be called incremental adaptation, in place, in the places, in situ, in different locations around the world. Where we are now headed is to look at it at a much greater scale. Adaptation is local, but it isn't only local. It can be much bigger than local. It could be national in scale, multinational in scale, indeed even global in scale. And this is what is now being termed sometimes by some people as transformational adaptation. It's sort of where we are headed. We don't know what that means yet. We don't know where it's going to take us, but it's a notion that we are now grappling with and trying to take forward. What does it mean? It's not about simply coping with the disasters that are going to occur with climate change, but coming out better after them and moving forward. So I hope that the contributions that are made here, the presentations and the posters and all the discussions that we have here will add to that body of knowledge and take us forward collectively, both amongst the people who are here, but many others who are very interested and will be watching and following us from all over the world. I can assure you many people are interested. They could not be here, but they will be looking at what we are doing and will be looking at the outcomes of this meeting. So I hope you have a fruitful time here. I'd like to thank you all for coming and welcome you again to this third Adaptation Futures Conference. Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite now the President of FONSEMI, Mr. Eduardo Martins, representing the government of the state of Ceará, the State Foundation of Meteorology, FONSEMI. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Initially, I'd like to thank Dr. Morango for the invitation to be here, to be able to take part of this conference and collaborate a little bit with its organization. The same way, I'd like to thank Dr. Rocha Magalhães, that has been making possible this kind of discussions in our state. And due to the discussions that we have had here in the States, we believe that some initiatives will benefit a lot from the discussions here. So I hope that we have a greater approach between the states, the Federal Union, and the universities. Universities have a lot to contribute. Just to give you an example, we now, as an initiative not of the state but the private sector, we're putting together a technical chamber in climate and water resources suggested by the Federation of Industry to the state governments that will have as a front the State Development Agency and our foundation, FONSEMI. This is an innovative initiative that I believe that much that's going to be discussed here we could actually benefit for the implementation of the actions of this new technical chamber. I'd like to make the most of the opportunity here as our host state. Welcome all of you, that you also have some free time to enjoy our natural beauties. Fortunately for us, you have brought rain, and unfortunately for you, it's been raining, so you will not be able to go and enjoy our beaches as much. But anyways, you're very much welcome to our state, especially to our capital city, Fortaleza, that you find some time here to enjoy a little bit of our city. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite all the dignitaries to please take back their positions on the floor so we can hear the opening conference of this event. Marina Silva, who I will introduce this evening. For almost 30 years of public life, Marina Silva has gained acknowledgement within and abroad for defense and ethics, for valuing natural resources and sustainable development. She was elected as city council, state member of the parliament, and twice senator, always with incredible record voting. Feminist from the environment, Minister of the Environment 2003-2008, and candidate president in 2010 for the Green Party. She received more than 50 national and international awards, amongst which Champions of the Earth, the main reward of United Nations in the environmental area. In 2012, she was honored during the ceremony of the London Olympic Games for their efforts to develop world peace, leading the flag with the Olympic rings. In September this year, she received the title of honorary member of the International Union for Nature Conservation and the National Congress of Conservation undertaken in Hichu in Korea. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mrs. Marina Silva. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Initially, I'd like to thank God to be here. I'd like to thank especially Dr. José Marengo for the invitation for me to be here, and together with the other partners, is heading this important conference as co-chair of this conference. I'd like to salute Dr. Salih Ehud, also the president of the conference, and salute Mr. Eduardo Martins, here representing the government of the state of Ceará. I'd like to salute all the attendees in the person of my Akron friend Foster Bros. Actually, the perspective of you, ladies and gentlemen, here, perhaps is to complementary to mine, but every time I am invited to speak about environment, climate change, any theme regarding this issue, I normally start by saying to people where I am talking from. I do not have a scientific accumulation knowledge about these themes. I'm not a scientist. What I do have is my experience, my life experience of about 30 years of social environmental militants, together with Chico Mendes, since I met him when I was 17. And again, as a city councillor, state member of the parliament, senator, minister in the environment, and being also a candidate to be president of Brazil in 2010. And it is from this place where I'm going to talk to you, from my life experiences. And also, something that I normally say is to contextualize a little bit this special moment that we are living now. And why is it for me so important to contextualize it? Because generally we have the perspective that we have a problem and that we need to give answers to this problem. But you, ladies and gentlemen, more than anybody know that before any intervention, it is key that we have a good diagnosis, a good understanding. And in a case like this, or such huge complexity, surely you need a lot of doctors together to finalize this diagnosis. Well, regarding the context of what you were debating here, I will have as priority the adaptation agenda. Ever since this debate is here, we know that the mitigation actions so that we can avoid the increase of the temperature over 2 degrees Celsius that can commit the future life on the planet is an effort that has to be undertaken by all different countries, by all different sectors. In the adaptation agenda, we know that's something that needs to be done now because we already live in the dramatic consequences of the effects of our actions over the planet. So the new word in the agenda is undoubtedly the need of not dealing with some actions as mere natural phenomena as though as they happen in a natural fashion. It has to do with our action, with the changes that we are undertaking. An important aspect in order to think all this effort perhaps has a lot to do also with a key issue to take us to our knowledge, to the technical responses and the political decisions, all the necessary actions so that this agenda can actually come through. And for me, this has a lot to do with the sense that we give to what's happening in the world with mankind today. So in order to face this problem regarding the environmental crisis, it's perhaps necessary that we think and see it in at least 3 important dimensions. Initially, is to think what happens to the state of the environment considering with the global environmental crisis that we are living. And not only the climate issue that surely is part of the essential configuration of the planet ecosystem, globally considered, as it were, is part of a greater crisis, of a crisis that we are inserted in its setting. Perhaps this is the climate issues, a species of a shift of the environmental crisis within this planet ecosystem. Another important issue is to think global crisis as an integral part of a civilization crisis. A crisis that perhaps needs a better care rather than just think about it as a response from the point of view of what we're going to be doing in order to solve the serious problems that are threatening the balance of the planet from the technical and scientific responses point of view and the investments. I normally say that the change in the development model that we need to undertake, leaving from this non-sustainable to a sustainable model, is not only a way to do it, it's actually a way to be. It's a vision of the world, it's a life ideal. If we think about the challenge of sustainability as only a way of doing, perhaps we're not going to be successful as we need to be. But to think sustainability as a way to be, as a worldview, as a life ideal, it will give us better attitude, more strength in order to do what needs to be done actually. Well, another thing, and later on I will go back to this, is to think that the means so that we can leave this crisis cannot be thought only from the point of view on how you do things, and how you do things actually aiming at a set of different senses, meanings as it were. I normally say that French Revolution, when they did a summary of the Greek thoughts with their ideal of freedom and liberty, of wisdom, of knowledge, many different things that came from Roman law and many things that came from different religious traditions, but overall from Judaism and the Western Christian translation. When we do equality, liberty, and fraternity, they open a gate from this meaning that was actually able to bring us up to here, making from the ashes of the civilizations that were going down, the new cradle, robust cradle of the civilization that was about to be born. This has a lot to do with meaning, with different meanings. Liberty, freedom, equality, and fraternity has brought us up to here with all the power, the strength, and robustness of everything we have lived. What are the new meanings? What are the new meanings that facing a crisis can actually drive us not to the cliff, but actually to the great gate of new possibilities? Thinking about environmental crisis within a civilization crisis requires from us to verify what is the nature of the civilization crisis. My intuition tells me that we live in a civilization crisis composed of 5 huge crises. We have an economic crisis, and the economists know how serious it is and how serious their implications are all over the world, and especially here in Brazil as well. Since 2008, this crisis has manifested as greater mobilizing resources from the great powers in order for us to overcome the economic crisis. We live in a huge social crisis. About 2 billion human beings live with less than $2 in the planet, and over them we have the lack of health, education, and housing, a good life, and over which the problems of climate change, of the lack of prioritization for adaptation, will seriously damage their situation even more. We have a serious social crisis, a huge economic crisis. We also have an environmental crisis. The problem regarding climate changes, perhaps this is a martyrdom, but the fact that we lose 1,000 more biodiversity than we lost 50 years ago, air pollution, water contamination, degradation of soil, all these factors constitute the global environmental crisis, of which the problems of climate change is very, very serious. Beyond the economic, social, and environmental crisis, we also have a political crisis. Please don't be threatened, because I'm not going to be talking about Brazil this morning here. We have a political crisis that's happening all over the world, all over the world. Brazil is also part of the political crisis. For us not to reduce things, today we have a huge demand on people for more participation and towards improving the quality of the political representation. When we invented the institutions that operate our lives from the American and French Revolution ideals, we had at that time 1 billion of human beings in this planet. There was a communication tool that was actually responsible so that these ideas could circulate all over the world, changing monarchies into democracy, configuring a new political reality, a new political subject. What actually made possible to circulate those ideas and ideals was undoubtedly the arrival of printed paper. We have come all the way here, and now we are 7 billion human beings with a very powerful tool called internet that breaks away from the classical mechanisms of intermediation of information and manages to bring from people to people in a billion scale. We are very, very happy and euphoric when seeing that these changes are actually revolutionize science, arts, spirituality, businesses, everything. And we, the politicians, we thought that this would never reach politics. We can actually imagine how this will not happen. The political crisis that we live in is the fact that perhaps today we are in prospective democracy. Before, those that were prospecting new ways of undertaking democracy were the political parties, the corporations, the universities, and then the trade unions, and then the NGOs, and so forth and so on. Today, with the arrival of these new ways of interaction of people, those who are prospecting new ways of undertaking democracy are actually the people in general, in a billion scale. We are in a prospective democracy. And the Greek who actually invented democracy for the free man, not for the women, not for the slave, not for the children, could actually see mankind democratizing democracy that they invented, and now they actually are present all over the world for the women, for the children, etc. In many different places we are fighting to reach this kind of democracies. We live in a political crisis because people want to improve the quality of representation, to increase participation, and we now have the arrival of the new political subject in the world. I could talk with young people from Canada, young people from Spain, young people from Chile, and many different movements in Brazil and abroad. And what I observe is the arrival of a new political subject. There is a political, economic, social, environmental, and political crisis in the world. And there's the sense that this new political subject is no longer directed simply. It is actually an author, mobilizer, it's a protagonist. We are living the directed political activists, directed by the trade union, by the political party, by the NGO, by the charismatic leader, towards a moment that I call the author activism. In this new form of activism, you are author, mobilizer, protagonist. What is the great effort that we need to take is that this author activism will not be fragmented into the individuality without the idea of public interest of collective project. What will not lead us nowhere. But we have the arrival of a new political subject. This new political subject is actually bringing to all of us the ethical interaction that we need to think the world from other references that we do not know exactly what they are. On the basis of the economic, social, environmental, political crisis, I would say that we have a deep value crisis. It is this one that is in the basis of all other crises. When I talk about values, I'm not talking under the moral perspective of the word values. I'm actually referring to the ethical system, not the theistic, unchangeable ethics in the relationship, the linking with culture, but it's not actually the relative ethics, the circumstantial ethics that does what is best for the circumstances in detriment of what needs to be done to preserve the organism. Bauman, in his book Aiming for Politics, he says, facing a certain situation, we can have a clinical or cynical attitude. The clinical attitude is the one that observes reality, diagnoses reality, understands the urgency sense, and takes a systemic attitude. I cannot give medicine to fever forever when the diagnosis says it's an infection, because medicine to fever is not a clinical attitude. If we carry on protelating what you scientists have been telling us for us decision makers, what needs to be done regarding adaptation, mitigation, governance, mobilization of resources, etc., surely we are not having a clinical attitude. You can fill in the rest as you wish, but we live a serious problem, a value crisis. It is this crisis that separates ethics from politics. It is the value crisis that separates economy from ecology. It is this value crisis that, despite all the signals that have been given by the evidence and by science, with its efforts, despite all this, it is the value crisis that makes us carry on destroying the resources from millions of years for the profits of only a few decades. This is not clinical attitude. There is a study that's been undertaken in the Amazon Research Institute that raises the possibility that the destruction of the Amazon forest can make the south and southeast regions into a desert. If this is actually true, we cannot wait and pay to see it. We have to work precautions principle by having a clinical attitude. If I have a strong pain in my chest, I cannot say, no, this is because you travel by plane, you're very tired, and the pain is still in my chest. I will immediately go to the heart doctor, the cardiologist, and I will have to pay some more expensive tests in order to get rid of the risk that I'm having a heart attack. Because if I have a heart attack, it can be irreversible. The precaution principle in the scale of the problems that you, ladies and gentlemen, work cannot be neglected, because perhaps in the future it might not be possible to reverse the problem. It is this value crisis that makes economy to separate from ecology, ethics from politics, because it will destroy the resources from thousands of years for the profits only in a few decades. How can we actually perhaps think these 5 different crises: economic, environmental, social, political, and values? If we have 5 different crises that put together one main crisis, the feeling that I have is that we live in a civilization crisis. And the civilization crises are not easy to be faced. When we have strange situations, we do 2 different things. We use our insights and our experiences. The encounter between experience and insight makes us to manage all situations, especially those that we're not familiar with. This time, perhaps our experiences will not help us a lot, because those that collapsed before us never managed to break away from their collapses. If we look at the pre-Columbian civilizations, when they collapsed, they actually collapsed, as it were. If we look at the Egyptians, at the Greek, at the Romans, at so many different civilizations that collapse, they really collapse, as it were. With one difference. It was not a collapse of everybody. One was flourish, one was dying. There was a sustainable management of collapses. The difference is that now we are all integrated. And what I'm saying affects us all. There is no place where we can hide from it. In Brazil, the anthropologists say that we have about 40 nations that have never been contacted, 40 different people that have never been contacted by people from our Western civilization, 40 of them. Many people say that our main wealth is the post-salt. I normally say that our main wealth are these 40 people that have never been contacted. It's a real treasure to have a civilization like this that has never been contacted. But even these are within this crisis and they cannot hide away from it. We are the scientists that bring the reality of diagnosis, and you are bringing us down as you are from politics. No, that way. I believe that we have a comparative advantage for those that collapsed before us. I believe, Professor Marengo, that they were not aware they were living a civilization crisis, and we are. And when the government or state of Ceará are taking actions towards a certain action, when we all say that it's necessary to adapt, mitigate, and all this and that, it's because we are aware that we are living this crisis, and we need to have a clinical attitude urgently. Problem, though, is that it's no good only to be aware of it. We need to change the attitude. And the idea of adaptation perhaps has to do not only with the actions themselves that need to be undertaken, but there are other ways of adaptation. We need to adapt to new priorities, for instance. We need to adapt to transferring resources to other things. We need to adapt to new attitudes. There is a civilization crisis that needs to be understood in the context of what we're going to be doing. And always that I am asked if I'm optimist or pessimist, I'm saying neither. Here in Brazil, there is a joke that when you are in the middle, that you are from the Social Democrats Party, but not one thing nor the other. Because in between is still a comfortable situation. I think we are actually trying to balance ourselves, and it's difficult to balance ourselves. We need to practice a lot. So I said, no optimist or pessimist, we have to be persistent on this tightrope, because from there we need to find the answers. And it was thanks to this persistency that in 2004 we started a plan to combat the deforestation of the Amazon involving 13 different ministries that was able to reduce CO2 emission in 80%, avoiding that 4 billion tons of CO2 were launched into the atmosphere and making Brazil to be the first developing country in Copenhagen to undertake emission reductions measurements. Unfortunate changes in our legislation in Brazil makes a deforestation after reducing for 10 years is now once again growing 28%. Persistency in long-term policies, persistencies in our short political terms in order to increase our deadlines in policy. This is the new agenda that needs to be faced. hope that we need a new model in order to face crisis. If this model no longer can account for it, we need to have a new model. Generally, when we talk about sustainable development model, the idea that we're talking about green by green, ecology by ecology, that the fact that we are eco-terrorists and all these other things that people label us. But when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about various different dimensions. The United Nations work with 4 different dimensions. Model, in order to be sustainable, you are aware of this, needs to be economically changing comparative advantages into competitive advantages. In order to be sustainable from the social point of view, it needs to change wealth produced in goods and services in order to improve with fairness life of people. In order to be sustainable, it also needs to be as a model from the environmental point of view, using wisely the resources in a way to meet our needs without committing the needs of those who are not born yet, preserving and conserving the natural basis of our development. In order to be sustainable, the 4th dimension says that the model needs to be, from the cultural point of view, sustainable, that eliminates diversity, that cannot preserve cultural diversity, is not sustainable. We will enter cultural erosion. Here in Brazil, we have a sentence that says, Narciso finds difficult what is not a mirror. I'm not sure if you can translate this into your languages, but cultural diversity is key so that we can be sustainable in the model development that we have. All right, we include 3 other dimensions. A model to be sustainable also needs to be from the aesthetics point of view. It seems to be superfluous, but some things needs to be preserved for the symbolic value, for the image, for the pictorial value, for the historical value it has. Now, in this great moment of big events of World Cup, somebody to accelerate their works decided to change the sugar loaf in Rio de Janeiro into rocks. Would never allow it, because that's not actually a big rock. It's not gravel. That has to do with aesthetics value that makes a lot as we are, so much as many other things. In order to be sustainable, it needs to be politically. It's unsustainable to think that a crisis of this size will be sorted out by just one government or by the scientists or by society as a whole. No, it will not. A civilization crisis has to be faced by civilization. It's not one person, it's not one political party. It is like the Chitan song says, everybody at the same time now. Business people, government, scientists, Indians, all at the same time now. This has to do with political sustainability. Political sustainability is not to outsource what is your obligation as well. In Brazil, normally press asks me about something that we feel very uncomfortable about it, and it's uncomfortable in all different countries and cultures. Corruption issues. Hoping that I will say that corruption is a problem of our President Dilma Rousseff. And I normally say that it is not Dilma's problem, corruption, as it was not a problem of Lula's, of Fernando Henrique's, of Itamár's, or Collor, or Sarney, of the Brazilian different presidents. It was not a problem of these governments, because as long as corruption is a problem of the government, be here in my country or in your countries, we always have corruption. It will only be sorted out effectively when it is changed into a problem of us. In Brazil, as long as slavery was a problem of the masters of the slaves, we had slavery. While democracy was a problem of the military, we have dictatorship. While inflation was a problem of the economists, we had horrible inflation. As long as social exclusion was a problem of charity, of assistancy. We had social exclusion seriously in Brazil. When this all became a problem of everyone, we finished slavery, we reconquered our democracy, we stabilized our currency, and we freed 30 million people from poverty in the last 16 years. This is political sustainability, this new political subject must not believe in saviors. The size of problems has to do with us being subjects that are able to answer not only a promise of a fate. Only the tyrants can offer a fate. Democrats, what we can offer is the possibility of a better world built by men and women that are able together to build this world. A model to be sustainable needs to be from the political point of view. Reduce deforestation in 80% was very expensive in Brazil, not in money. Budget was 400 million in about 5 years' time. Very, very little, one could say. Very, very little for the size of the works and the achievement. 5 billion tons of CO2. However, what was done at that time was actually a very huge effort. We arrested 1 million cubic meters of timber. 4 billion in penalties were done. And we have to inhibit 37,000 illegal properties, creating 24 million hectares of conservation units and putting 720 people in prison. Finishing 1,500 criminal companies, thus reducing deforestation 80%. This is not one people's achievement or one government's achievement. It's a culture, it's a society. 25 years ago, Chico Mendes, symbol of a world environmentalist, was murdered because he wanted to protect the rubber trees where he lived with his companions. 20 years later, and we managed this achievement. It's not an achievement of one person. It has to do with political sustainability. In order to be sustainable, a model has to be also from the ethical point of view. Good part of the problems already have technical responses. What we need is the ethical commitment to change the into public policies, into business and corporate policies. This has to do with the place of meaning. And the great effort that we need to take is revisit our civilization childhood. We were guided up to very little time before for the idea of being. The whole history of mankind in the last years come from this idea of being. Mercantilism 450 years ago made us to wake up with the idea of making and having. But the trajectory of mankind is guided by the idea of being. The Greek wanted to be wise and free. The Romans wanted to be huge and strong. In the Middle Age, despite all the saints, on behalf of saintliness, people wanted to be fed. One day, the idea of scientists was to make science, or philosophers was to make philosophy. Being saints was to make in church, dismos and parishes, and we reached the 60s, and the love and relationship between two people became to make love. In a cosmovision that we have, we create a black hole for what we do, and we have created this black hole called consumption. We make and we consume, make and we consume. We are not suffering from the lack, absence. We are suffering from excess. This is our problem. And perhaps we have to learn to live with the lack of the lack. Our problems have nothing to do with failure, have to do with success. The more Romans conquered and domained, the more they were successful. And that was the key of their failure. Because with so many different territories, of so many peoples, they could not maintain the territory and not even aggregate culture. The good things must be preserved and remain our civilization experience. We need to reconnect ourselves with the ideal of being. Nobody asks a child what they will do in the future. We ask them, what do you want to be in the future when you grow up? The question is, what do we want to be as a human race, as civilization? What do you want to be as Brazilians, as Americans, as Japanese, as Peruvians, as Bolivians? What do we want to be? This is the question that's put to us as an ethical imperative. And I believe that the answer is we want to be sustainable economically, socially, environmentally, politically, ethically, and aesthetically, so that we carry on economically prosperous, socially fair, environmentally sustainable, culturally diverse, politically democratic. For me, it's a new way of being. People normally ask here, are you left or right wing, Marina, or center? What are you? I say I am progressive sustainability. This is an idea of world. This is a way we see world. It's a new way of thinking the world. Well, after saying all this, if we think sustainability not only as a way to do things, but a way to be, it's an ethical imperative that we have the means for the adaptation mitigation agendas, so that we have the means in order to make the change into the models of development. This is what it's all about. This is the basis of everything. And I'd like to conclude. And I know this is a scientist meeting, and I have already said I'm not a scientist. And those who are studying the climate, I'm not a political science. I just have my insights, my intuition. And it is from these insights that I'm talking to you, from this feeling that I'm talking to you. This new activism that's arriving now in the world can help us to make a change that we cannot actually assess it now. Differently than the old political subjects that needed the port, that needed the column, that the arc in order to move. This new political subject does not have a port, a harbor. It does have an anchor. There is a difference between the port and the anchor, says Licio Fernandez, who is psychoanalyst from Argentina. The port, I need to be there, stopped. The anchor belongs to me. If I feel that I have good winds, I raise my anchor and I go. If not, I let it go. These new movements that happen today in the world are alteral movements that people have their anchor. And this is our huge hope that even with the effort of trying to exile science from the climate change debate, of trying to domesticate most society will give political sustainability so we can carry on the change. It's not in a long transition because we don't have time for that. Not of an abrupt rupture. It's not magic. We need to invest in renewable energy, and this takes time. Technology, innovation, this takes time. It's not magic, but some sort of mutation, a possibilitating mutation at the governments, the companies, science, tradition, modernity, all together at the same time. Now we will gradually have some sort of a bridge in the new system, creating a new surface into which we can migrate towards to. It is a change in a different scale, and in my understanding, we'll call all of us not to be militants to one cause or to one political party or to any kind of whatever, but militants of civilization as a whole. And even though we have the diagnosis ready, knowing the trajectory of the ball doesn't necessarily mean that we know how to play the game. We need to calculate the trajectory of the ball as a Argentina psychoanalyst says, Ricardo Goldenberg, his name, but we need to be there playing the game. And playing the game is all this agenda that you bring into us as the terms of reference to all of us. so that we, from the governments, corporations, all different sectors, from social entrepreneurship, we can make the changes, putting together tradition and modernity. That is the best from the scientific knowledge produced by the postulates of what's right and wrong in the denotative fashion, but also from the narration knowledge from traditional population that have knowledge associated to natural resources, that know how to listen to, know how to do, and know how to mainly to see things and notice things. It's putting all this together. I'd like to conclude with a bit of a story about a bird. They had 3 little babies, and the bird decided to have its nest not so close to the forest so that the other birds would not eat their babies, and not so close to their houses, the constructions, so that the cats would not eat their babies. One day you had a huge storm and the babies fell down on the floor, and he was so threatened as a bird, goes down to the birdies to save them. Afraid of the other big birds and the cat, he had pressure from both sides. And he reaches one of the babies and says, "Our daddy is making a great sacrifice here for you, running this risk for you. If you ever happen something for daddy, would you do the same for daddy?" And the little bird says, "Yes, yes, daddy, yes, I'll do anything, I'll do everything," because he wanted to be saved. To the second, the daddy says the same thing, the same promises of being saved. The very, very tiny one that just been born without any feathers, no chance for them to be saved. So would you do the same thing for daddy? Run the same risk for daddy? I'm not sure if I'll do for you, daddy, but I will do for my own children. This is the ethical imperative that's put in front of all of us, before all of us. We are only human beings because we can establish what Lacan says, the social ties. Social ties is the capacity of caring of the future. Caring for the future, working in the present. All this tie. Caring for the past, caring for what's going to happen in the future. And in order to do so, we need to re-signify our civilization experience. If in the past we have made mistakes that have brought us up to here, and this is an effort to all countries, the idea of the principle of common but different responsibilities cannot be so that some will not have responsibilities. They are different, but we all have to have responsibilities. It's not to hide ourselves. Brazil is a great emission. We need to be targets for emissions, and we have to have resources for those who still cannot do it, can do it in the right way. We cannot request to make the same mistake. This is a request that is not ethically sustainable. It's not ethically sustainable. The negative that we're not going to help with technology, innovation, and resources so that those who still have not reached to meet basic needs can actually do so. This is an ethical imperative. We need to be able to be concerned about the social ties, to care for the future, working now in the present, establishing this connection, this link with this little birdie that says, "I'm not sure if I will do for you, daddy, but 100% sure what I will do for my own children." We need to know what we will do for our children, for our grandchildren, for those who are not born yet. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So to ratify our thank yous for Marina Silva, we would like to invite Dr. José Marenco in order to give to our special guest her certificate and also a souvenir from our conference. So thank you very much, Mrs. Marina Silva. Ladies and gentlemen, continuing with our program, we're going to watch here the voice of youth and climate change. And so for this presentation, our guest is the young student Irenildo de Souza, whom I'd like to invite to the stage at this moment. Irenildo, from the British Council, is also a representative from the Brazilian environmentalist youth at the UN. He was member of the UN Convention on Climate Change, and so presenting to us the voice of youth and climate change, the 19-year-old youngster Irenildo de Souza. Good morning. Dear co-chairs, Mr. Marengo and Mr. Salim Hook, Mrs. Marina Silva, global leader in sustainability, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the co-chairs of the conference for the opportunity that shows that it is not only about a written word on paper and in declarations, but also the spoken word communicated directly to one another, no matter your age or your generation. I am very satisfied and honored to be here and to be part of this important event. A lot more important than all the beautiful words are the actions that should follow from them. All the children, young people, and families around the world, more than 50 countries are being represented here today. You represent your countries, and all of them count on you and your actions. We are anxious. The youth is anxiously awaiting to working actively with you to create and achieve the goals for our common and sustainable future. Because not only the youth, but an intergenerational partnership will be part of the solution.
Today I am speaking on behalf of the Generation C, Generation Climate. We are the generation that is going to feel the most impacts from climate change. Many of us are here today is a recognition that the threat from climate change is serious, is urgent, and it is growing. Our generation's response to this challenge will be judged by history. For if we fail to meet it boldly, swiftly, and together, we risk consigning future generations to an irreversible catastrophe. The size of climate change is leaping out at us like a scene from a 3D movie. Last month, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, confirmed us that the effects of climate change are already widespread, costly, and consequential. The world's top scientists are clear. Temperature of atmosphere and of the oceans continue to increase. Ice caps and glaciers are on the road, steadily declining. The global sea level is rise, and the human influence of the climate system is very clear. Ladies and gentlemen, no nation, however large or small, wealth or poor, can escape the impact of climate change. Rising sea level threatens every coastline. More powerful storms and floods threaten every continent. More frequent droughts and crop failures breed hunger and conflict in places where hunger and conflict already thrive. On striking islands, families are already being forced to flee their homes as climate refugees. The security and stability of each nation and all people, our prosperity, our health, and our safety are in jeopardy. And the time we have to reverse this tide is running out. Adaptation to climate change is necessary, and one way to strengthen our resilience to wealth and climate shocks will be issue more and better wealth and climate information for action. The youth of the road can do much to advance climate action. Climate action, it is not just about carbon dioxide emissions. It is about people. It is about of each of us, about the values we share and what we are ready to do realize them. I am confident that children and youth are not the only stakeholders of tomorrow's future. Many of us are already acting as today's leader. Learning more about this science, understanding the importance of intergovernmental collaboration on climate issues, communicating climate risk to facilitate adaptation, and promoting climate awareness can be an important contribution of youth to climate action. Dear co-chairs, ladies and gentlemen, the journey is long. The journey is hard. And we don't have much time left to make the journey. But there are moments in history when scientific evidence, political commitment, and broad participation converge to change the course of history. Change is in the air. We can sense it at all levels of society. Solutions exist. The race is on. Let's be the head of the race. We young people have the energy, the motivation, the innovation. You scientists, you policymakers, you members of society have the experience, the knowledge, the power. We want to work with you, learn with you, and be part of the change that we want to see in the road. Don't get left behind. Don't be on the loose side of history. I agree with the United Nations Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, when he said, while climate change is the force transforming the natural state of our planet, youth have the power to move this transformation on a sustainable path. Let's remember, if there is always a plan B, there is no planet B. Today, history offers us a chance to make a difference. Let us take advantage of the opportunity presented by climate action and lay the foundations for a more prosperous and security future for all. Thank you very much.
And so after this opening remarks, I would like to invite Dr. José Marengo, who can also give a memento and certificate to our special guest, the young student Iranildo de Souza. Thank you. thank you for your participation, and we will have a 20-minute coffee break. Thank you very much for your attention.